think many of you would agree if I said that Commander players tend to be really bad at card evaluation. Because of their limited worldview of being in a multiplayer format, the cards that are good in EDH are very different from the rest of Magic, which tends to be a little bit more 1v1 oriented, but it doesn't mean it's completely wrong. On the screen right now, you're going to see Tower Winder, a card that has a lot of the EDH community ablaze in terms of being good or bad, but what I think a lot of people aren't doing is focusing on the real problem that Tower Winder is really proliferating, the controversy that is under everyone's ruse right now. And I think Tower Winder is the perfect starting point for that discussion. Now, the card itself, again, has everyone a little bit ablaze, and I think I want to provide a little bit of definitive answer as to whether or not it's bad, but no hate to any of the creators here that are featured. The card itself is a 3/1 for Creature Snake, reach that touch for a 1/1. Whenever Tower Winder enters the battlefield, you can search your library and or graveyard for a card named Command Tower, reveal it, and put it in your hand. If you would search your library, shuffle it. Notably, do not be shuffling your graveyard. There are a lot of graveyard order matters cards that are legal in Commander, so for those of you that take EDH a bit more seriously, just keep that in mind. For casual pods, doesn't really matter. But Tower Winder tutors for Command Tower, but it does not put it onto the battlefield that you would think of with traditional ramp cards. So this isn't a ramp card, this is a tutor in many ways. So it puts it in your hand. Command Tower, a pretty synonymous card in Commander. It's been printed a bunch of times. Add 1 mana of any color to your commander's identity. This is legal in other constructed formats, but just unplayable because the land doesn't really do anything. Now, of course, you could Blood Moon and turn into something, but that's a whole other discussion in itself. Command Tower has many printings, with so many recently as well. I mean, it was originally printed back, if we scroll down, I mean, just look at all versions of this card. If we scroll all the way down and just go to, you know, through Scryfall right now, this was printed way back in the original Commander set right here. If we click through this right now, I mean, look at it. This was Commander 2011, really revolutionary card, I should say, for the format in general, and now we have a tutor for it. But really, we have other land tutors as well. 3/1, Sylvan Ranger for a 1/1. This is an elf, which is also very relevant in terms of types. When Sylvan Ranger enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, and put it in your hand. That's arguably technically just the same, or even better, depending on if you're playing a multicolor deck. This gives you more options to look for. It's not just Command Tower, so if you already have a Command Tower on the battlefield, you don't whiff with Sylvan Ranger, so good thing to note there. Or what about Great Creeper Vine? Same for O2 with Defender, slightly better blocking potential. When Gate Creeper Vine enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic land or a gate, so you have more options if you wanted to win with the Maze's End. Gate Creeper Vine is just going to be one of those staples in your EDH deck if you're winning with that. But obviously, the River Winder just has a lot more defensibility. So Reach and Death Touch is very powerful. It can chump block something massive. It can block flyers. There's a lot more to that. And being a snake, someone like Shivam really points out that they need to make room for in their Hapatra deck for this, but they're just going to take out the Command Tower, essentially pointing out that it's not about the Command Tower. It's the fact that it's a snake and it has Reach and Death Touch, which is really powerful. And Hapatra being a legendary here, kind of second line attacks whenever you put 1 or more -1/-1 counters on a creature, create a 1/1 green snake creature token with Death Touch. So it's another snake creature token, it's another Death Touch token. So if you have Death Touch matters, maybe you have some Basilisk Callers and stuff, like you just want to like throw things at people, there you go. Death Touch matters, snakes. But it's essentially highlighting the fact that the card shouldn't really be there to tutor for Command Tower. And if it does, I think ultimately the card is bad. If that's its primary purpose. People are talking about the whole whiff potential, like if you have Command Tower out, the card does nothing. I would argue that it technically still does. It has the whole Reach and Death Touch thing, but it really just goes to show that it's not flexible, but it is a casual tutor in many ways. And that's where I kind of want to get this controversy discussion going of how casual can we make EDH tutors to the point where no one is focusing on the real problem at hand here. The problem where we are kind of undermining the power of some of these tutors. How far can we push them before they become problematic? Sure, it's not a demonic tutor. You can't search for anything. But the whole idea of casual tutor gets the mind thinking, because ultimately this is the real problem. this is addressing the real problem in the room, that we are printing too many tutors in a format that isn't really meant for it. And now at this point, with something like Tower Winder, we're kind of hiding them behind some walls or creating conditions to allow them to be a bit more casual, under the radar, and then just be these underrated cards that people play over time. You know, tutors in a casual play group. This has been a problem for so long. What creates that marker of whether or not a card is good, card is bad, or whatever it might be? And really, what about something like Polluted Delta, which is a land tutor? Fetch lands are land tutors. A lot of people would argue that these break the color pie in every way because their text doesn't allow them to be color restricted. They don't actually have any symbols in them. So you could technically be playing Polluted Delta in your whatever color deck. You could be playing it in your mono blue deck to look for islands, even though it searches for swamps as well. But then if you would say that Polluted Delta should be banned or isn't a great thing for the format, would you say Evolving Wilds is also bad for the format? A lot of folks would argue that it's perfectly fine. Its power level is perfectly based in reality. It's just getting basics, it's putting them onto the battlefield tapped, and it's doing a lot of good things that's been synonymous with the idea of what EDH is now. But is the idea of what EDH now just warped because of cards like this? What about a card like Enlightened Tutor? A lot of folks will argue that this card is generally bad for the format because of how it tutors. You're searching for an artifact or an enchantment. You are putting it on top of your library, but it's an instance. You're really end stepping this and you're drawing the card, right? So that's the whole idea with Enlightened Tutor. It's 1 mana. It does a lot. This card is absolutely insane. It's great. It's part of so many combos and it's part of so many high power EDH decks. What about something like Plea for Guidance? It is 5 more mana, colorless, it's sorcery, and you search your library not for artifacts, but up to 2 enchantments, reveal them, and you put them directly into your hand. So there's some downsides and upsides. You can't do this at instant speed, but you can put it in your hand. It costs 6, but then you put 2 enchantments in your hand. You still have to cast them. So would you argue that this is fine because of its cost? Would you argue this is okay because it doesn't look for artifacts? And this is where we start getting into the whole min-maxing idea of whether or not cards are safe based on our opinions, and then we have to get in house rules. Are we using house rules to police the real problems in the format? Technically, yes. A lot of people would say that, yes, we police out infinite combos where we say you can only go like infinite 5 times or something. Like if you're going infinite, you can only do that infinite like 5 times and then you have to stop. Or they say no land destruction or no double sleeving. I'm taking it a little far in terms of the joke, but where is your cutoff? Where do we get to the point where tutors are actually bad for EDH? And I think this really comes in with the whole role of tutors in EDH, right? Like they're solving a underlying problem with the format that is built in and that is part of the magic of the format, that it's singleton, that every game is supposed to be different. Every game is to play out in a different way because 4 players involved, there's going to be different cards drawn, different interactions, different ways people do combat, and suddenly the control deck might be the aggressive deck in one game, and suddenly the aggressive deck might actually be the mid-range prison deck based on how they're playing it out and they're controlling the game. So every game is supposed to play out different, but with tutors, the consistently vastly increases. We start having games feel the same. And this can start happening with cards like Riverwinder, where we start having these casual tutors where all of a sudden our mana's fixed even better. But this is okay, it's only looking for 1 card. But then what if you start tutoring for Riverwinder? Then Riverwinder tutors for a land, and then that land helps you cast another tutor. It starts getting a little insane that way. And this article by Corbin Hosler, again, it's going to be linked down below, is really great in terms of some of the highlighting points that it goes through. It adds some shuffling, and then it makes the games repetitive, as I mentioned, and just, you know, making the game more unfun in terms of adding to the consistency and power of different decks. And again, I highly recommend you read through this whole article, starting from this tweet where tutors are bad in 100 card singleton formats, carry on by Marshall Sutcliffe. A lot of great minds in Magic have talked about how tutors are bad for EDH. And this video ultimately is where I'm going to culminate into this, the problem with cEDH. And this video really talks about how, you know, every game starts to feel the same when you tutor for the same lines, same win conditions, same everything, and things start to end up in the same result. And that's what cEDH decks are. They are these culmination points of 1 or 2 win conditions that you interact and control the board to until you can get to. And that's perfectly fine. But then is the rest of the EDH format just getting to that point? And I think Riverwinder might be a slow symptom of that, where we end up in this idea of hyper optimization that I think a lot of constructed players can get into getting into Commander. And that's one thing I want to address on my end, where I have this hyper optimized view of the Commander format, and I really try and push myself out of it. And I challenge this for many constructed players that are constructed players first that play Commander, not Commander players that play constructed. There's a very big difference, because as someone who is focused on hyper optimization in a constructed format where you want to be playing the best version of the card that you're looking for, the best effect based on the type of deck you're playing, you don't necessarily want to be doing that in EDH, because you want to create lower powered decks for different pods. You want to create different types of interactions that synergize with your commander. And so the effect might not be optimal, but the effect is hyper synergistic with something you're doing or want to do in the deck at the time. And so this is where I guess the controversy really is. Where does Tower Winder fit? Is it the tipping point, or have we already kind of spilled the glass and we are just going full throttle into casual tutors for lower power tables? And I leave that question up to you. Ultimately, I think Tower Winder isn't that great of a card, but I think it is the start, or at least the visual representation of where EDH is going down a negative path of not just hyper powered cards and cards being designed for the format, but ultimately tutors that ruin the game and the format in general for the casual player. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. I'd really like to hear your thoughts about this. I think, this really got me thinking on just some other topics. And of course, if you want to see more videos like this in the future, let me know what you want me to speak on. I have some other kind of videos around similar stuff like this coming later in the week. But again, your thoughts are key down below. Is Tower Winder great? Are tutors bad? Sound off in the comments.